Just to start, I'm Ryan Mckinster. I'm the Government Affairs Director here at the BIA. We had been doing some weekly webinars kind of when this whole crisis started, mostly around specific compliance issues and best practices with COVID specifically. And we realized it seemed to be a good process. We've had a lot of people that have really appreciated it. And we wanted to turn it into a long-term event. Having webinars, either every other week, once a month, depending on what's out there. And since we are kind of in a holding pattern with the current situation with COVID and some other things, and we know a lot of jurisdictions have had to come up with new ways of doing business. I think some were better positioned with their permitting system, and I think Vancouver is one example of that to deal with this crisis. The intent is to have different jurisdictions in over the next 6 to 8 weeks to explain where they're at, with the understanding is we're not changing practice anytime soon. There are going to be restrictions for longer than we had hoped, and so it's a good point now for our different jurisdictions to come in and maybe give a little update and then answer any questions about what the process is, and to hear from you as well. I know I've not spoken with Jason much. I've not heard from many of you regarding your interaction with Vancouver. I know in other jurisdictions there have been some issues, and just conversations have allowed us to mitigate some of those problems. So this is basically a dialogue and back and forth. I'm going to turn it over to Jason if he wants to give an intro and to speak to a little bit about what they're doing. But for the most part, I envision this as being a back and forth where you guys can bring your questions or concerns and maybe get some things answered. Communication is a little difficult now with people being in the office, out of the office, and all around. So I figured this will be a good clearinghouse for some of those conversations. And with that, Jason, I'll turn it over to you, my friend.
All right, thanks, Ryan. Just really quick, I'm Jason Nartz. I am the Development Review Division Manager for the City of Vancouver. We oversee the planning, building, code, and permitting functions for the city. I've been with the city for a little over 3 years now. Previously, I was the Director for Community Development for the City of Asheville, North Carolina. My background is in land use planning. I was a practicing planner for over a decade prior to getting in kind of the management and process improvement side of things. We also have Shri on the line, and I'll let him introduce himself, but he is our building official, and we would certainly be lost without him during this time. It's been, as you can all appreciate, a bit crazy ever since COVID's kind of hit us in the end of March. But real quick, I'll just let Shri introduce himself. Then I'll talk about some of our process improvements and things that we've done since COVID.
Hey, good morning, everyone. This is Shri, building official. Many of you probably know me. Most of you have been with the city for quite some time, so I'm the guy to blame if anything that doesn't work right. Yeah, I mean, COVID is really tested us in so many different ways. We had to adapt, as I'm sure you're having to do that every day, and you did over the past several months. One thing that Jason didn't mention was Jason's been with us for about 3 years. And there's something that we didn't have. We didn't have e-plans, or we were just starting on e-plans when Jason came on board. And I remember the interview discussions with Jason. Our biggest venture back then was having the e-plans process, and Jason will expand on it. Today we have 100%. We're 100% operational on e-plans. Any permit type can be submitted online, and staff will get the plans. There's no more locating files, misplacing files, hand carrying files from person to person. So all of those things are things of the past. They've been, and there's, I can't imagine us going through COVID, maintaining services business without e-plans. Simply wouldn't have been possible. So that's thanks to Jason and the e-plans team that made it happen. Other than that, we're doing the best we can with inspections. Our workload, of course, I'm sure you're seeing this too. I mean, your fingers are on the same pulse, probably a different point than we have. It slowed down sharply in March and April, and it sprung back quite strong So we're staying busy with permits and inspections and keeping up with what's coming through. Happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, thanks, Shri. Yeah, so just a couple of things that I'll touch on that Shri spoke to, e-plans and specifically permit activity. So e-plans, I know it's not perfect yet. We're getting there. It's been a slog to say the least, but I mean, timing couldn't have been better from our perspective as far as being 100% electronic. Pretty much about 6 months before COVID hit us. As Shri said, I don't think we would have been able to function efficiently if we were in the paper world right now, given that we're not even allowed to be in City Hall. So it's kind of been a blessing in disguise with us. I recognize there's certainly a lot of areas for improvements. One of the biggest things that we stressed upon you all and our customers, you know, when we kind of flipped the switch going from a paper process to e-plans was efficiency improvements in the electronic process versus paper process. And I know sometimes if things don't track down the path of getting done quicker, it's hard to justify the change. And I know that's been a point of frustration for a lot of people in terms of, you know, maybe not getting things done as quickly as you would in the paper world, or just simply showing up to our permit counter. I recognize that's definitely still an area we need to improve on. I did feel like right before COVID, we had kind of hit a point where we were doing really well in that area. We had actually gotten to a point where we were fully staffed with our permit team and our plans examiners. So that was also contributing to a little bit of being more successful with processing things. But then COVID hit and it kind of blew up the process as we know it. Fortunately, we were still able to continue to process everything because we have an electronic software system that allows us to do that 24/7, essentially anywhere from any type of device. It's very compatible from that perspective. But where I think we lost some traction is we were required to we had some staffing impacts. So we were required to do some furloughs because of the budget impacts to the city. We actually had a layoff within our department. And you put that into the mix along with just the balancing of, you know, 2 weeks of furlough, summer vacation schedules, and layoffs. And we've gotten a little bit behind the 8 ball in terms of our efficiency for processing e-plans. So I completely recognize that. I completely own that. We are actually interviewing today to fill one of those vacancies. I'm happy to report. So we got approval to go ahead and do that. Shri is in the process of recruiting for another plans examiner, as well as we do have approval for another inspector down the line. So I think we're gonna hopefully see, you know, an uptick in as far as getting us caught up and being a little bit more efficient with things. We did actually just do 2 weeks of overtime for all of our permit specialists to help kind of clear out the backlog. So we're going to get caught up to where we were pre-COVID levels. So that's just kind of some background information on that, and letting you all know that, yes, we recognize we haven't been as good as we could be, but we'll get better. Really quick, just in terms of development activity, as Shri talked about. So initially, pre-COVID, I would say 2018 through 2019, even beginning of 20, we were at our all-time high in terms of development activities in the city of Vancouver. You know, over 1,500 building permits and development permit applications a month, over 4,000 building inspections a month. And then COVID hit at the end of March. We actually, as a city, closed on March 23rd. It didn't really impact too much of the March numbers, but April, we went from about 1,400 building permits, land use applications, trade permits a month, all the way down to 700 in April and just slightly above that in May. And I think most of us know why that was, because we had the governor's essentially restrictions on construction activity, preventing us from actually being able to do construction activity and inspections. But once that was removed, to Shri's point, we saw a quick uptick in construction, and I'm happy to report it. June and July are back up above 1,400 and even 1,500 in July for total number of permits and land use applications that came in, and we almost topped out at 4,000 inspections again in June and July. So it's all promising and good news, I'm sure, for all of you as it is for us. We also have a lot of the school bond projects that are keeping us going and busy. Those are bond funded clearly, so they won't be impacted by COVID or any other economic factors. So we've got a lot going on. So at this point, I'm happy to entertain any questions you all have. I know Sri can probably touch on a few other things, but we're here to just answer questions you have. So thanks for the time.
Yeah, well, thank you for that introduction, kind of the overview for you gentlemen. If anybody has a question, feel free to just unmute yourself and answer that. As long as that works, we'll just go with that. If it gets a little bit unruly, we can go to raising your hand, but it's usually just easier for you guys to speak up. So if anybody would like to ask a question, that would be great. This is your time. Or a concern. And like I mentioned in other places, we've had some concerns come up, and we've had that discussion. We were able to address some of them fairly quickly. So it looks like, Jack, you're unmuted, so I'm assuming you have a question.
I do have a question. I did have a wanted to understand why. My understanding is the building department is funded by our fees exclusively. So why would we have layoffs or staff cutbacks or furloughs when it's funded by the building, the people that are doing the building activity?
Yeah, sure. Good question, Jack. Thanks. So we are essentially, our department consists of two funding sources: the general fund, which is all like non-specific building permit type of functions. So our land use planners, for example, code enforcement. I'm trying to think who else. So we have engineering technicians, some of our admin staff. And then we have a building fund, which is essentially an enterprise fund. And to your point, Jack, it pays for the cost to do the service. So those are all of our plans examiners, building inspectors, permit staff. So initially, when we kind of the COVID impacts became realized by the city, the cuts that were made were essentially all to general fund. Building fund is in a very healthy spot. As you know, we recently adjusted some of our building permit fees. We adjusted our valuation table because for years we had been operating at fees that were very low compared to industry standards, and they weren't covering our cost of services. So we made those changes a few years ago to get our building permit or our building fund in a healthy spot. And I'm happy to report that's the case, and Sri can elaborate on that. So we didn't make any cuts to building funded positions, but some of the things just bad timing related, where we had a retirement and a promotion that all occurred right before COVID hit. And those were positions that were in the building fund. And we were told, just because of everything that had happened, everything was just frozen at the moment before this, to kind of give the city a chance to figure out the economic impact. So none of our building positions have been eliminated or put on the table at this point. It's just been general fund positions. And then we also, two of our primary groups are also collectively bargain groups, union groups. And so some of those other positions in the city were eliminated, and there's bumping rights as part of the union, and you can bump into other positions. Just so happens we lost an employee that was a key to our permit team that got bumped out by another employee in the union. And I won't bore you with the details of that. So yeah, none of the building funded positions were impacted.
Were any of them furloughed?
No, it was all general funded, exempt staff that was initially furloughed for this budget cycle of 2020. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, who's next? I guess I will. You know, a lot of these people, Jason, I sent you this list of some of the questions people ask. When I have people register, I ask for one question, and one of them, and this is not unique to you. I know this happens in the paper world in other jurisdictions, but the question was, you know, just making a change or a second review, why do you have to go back to the bottom of the wait list? I have not done your process, so I'm not sure if that occurs every time, if that occurs sometimes, if that's occurring at all. So that was one question I saw, and I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, I think that's just, and I completely understand that frustration. And I think that's just the way that currently we have the software, the functionality of the software, the way it's programmed to what happens when something comes in the pipeline, it just automatically starts at the bottom. And, you know, we've talked about internally if there's ways to manage that. So for example, we've adjusted our review timelines for second and third review cycles. So when something comes in, it won't have to wait as long as it would if it were traditionally in a first review cycle. We're trying to have, we've talked about actually assigning permit specialists to projects so that way when the project actually comes in, it won't get, overlooked, because they're basically just functioning as far as what comes in and in any given day. But at this point, we're functioning behind. But so they're not necessarily the permit specialists, the ones that are triaging everything at the beginning, don't know the history, so to speak, of the project, if it's in its third review cycle, or what the issues are, or the timeliness that it might need to get looked at right away, versus the planned examiner or the planner who's been working with the applicant knows the timeliness of that. So Shri and I and our land use planning manager, Greg Turner, have talked about maybe ways to make sure that those ones that are in for the third or fourth review cycle, that they're not just sitting there and kind of spinning their wheels and, waiting for someone to take action, where we can maybe more expeditiously grab that virtually off the pile and get it to the planned examiner or whoever that one individual person is that has the outstanding comment to. So yeah, that's definitely an area we can improve upon for sure. Shri, I don't know if you have anything to elaborate on that issue.
Some of the things we have implemented over the years. Last time I was at BIA in person, we talked about early start permits, deferred submittals, and a few of the process changes that we've made. Those are still in place. Deferred submittal process that allows folks to submit applications while they're still waiting on MEP package. They can submit the TI plans. We still have that deferred submittal process, and we also have early start process. We just issued 2 permits at Waterfront, 2 TIs, where they're real, crunch time. They need to have the businesses open by a certain time. And early start permit is essentially you bring in the plans, you submit the application, upload the plans, and you sign a waiver saying that you're proceeding at your own risk. Allows you to start framing and doing some of the work while we're doing the reviews. We will do a cursory review. Anything that jumps at us, we'll let you know. But it allows folks to start some of the framing and demo work while the plans are being reviewed and approved.
So Sri, is that exclusive for commercial, or is that for resident? Is there a residential counterpart?
That's for commercial.
Okay.
Early start is for commercial, yeah. Residential, our timelines in residential, of course, are shorter than commercial timelines. Yeah.
So Jason, I'm asked this question because, we've got a lot of people that work in multiple jurisdictions, and I've noticed, and I've done it myself, conflating some issues or worried about issues in other jurisdictions. You don't want to see them occurring here and stuff like that. I know in other places, there's been a problem with concurrent review. Stuff is very linear, so if it gets stuck somewhere, the whole rest of the process just screeches to a halt, which seems very inefficient. I know other jurisdictions allow everything to be flagged, and if they need to follow up later on, they do. How is your process? Is it strictly linear, or is there some concurrent review going on?
It's both. And again, I think Shri can speak to this. I mean, usually what happens, especially for larger permits, is, it'll start with the pre-application meeting. It's certainly not a requirement, but it's strongly encouraged. That's to get any red flags out there before you even go down the path of submitting any type of permits and spending the money. Then essentially that would be followed up through the land use process. Land use process can, depending on the complexity of the project, can take time if public meetings are required. Appeals can happen. If it's a politically hot project, all those things can impact the timeliness of that. And in those instances, sometimes we will allow, projects, the engineering, land use piece of it to get submitted, as well as, maybe to Shri's point, some of the grading permits to come in ahead of time. So we kind of do it on a case-by-case basis based on our comfort level. And again, it's at the risk of the developer too, knowing that if they're submitting a building permit, while maybe there's still engineering or land use issues that are getting resolved, that they potentially run the risk of then having to go back and amend those building permits because maybe things on the land use or, the engineering side change that significantly impacted the project. But again, I'll let Shri elaborate on that a little bit as well, because I know his team deals with it all the time.
How much time do we have, Ryan?
Well, as of right now, you have about 38 minutes. So,
30 minutes. Okay, this is a question. As Jason mentioned, in the process, there are certain things that are linear, where you start with the pre-application. And again, I think much of this discussion is on the commercial side, but if I'll try to get into residential at the end of it. You start with the pre-application, submit your site plan application, your civil plan application, and building permit application. And some things are linear there. You need to start with your pre-app. You need to start your land use application before you can turn in your building permit application. One thing that's not there anymore, folks may remember, when we had the Mylars signatures, that was something really probably the most frustrating thing that we had in process. Where there were signature blocks for different engineers to sign, fire marshal and different engineers to sign, and it's the same piece of paper that you take it from person A to person B to person C, and you can imagine how frustrating that is, and especially when that person is out, and then it just sits there for that person to come back. On a complex projects, folks don't want to step in and okay, that's history. That's not there anymore. So plans, electronic, there are no copies. You just send it to all the folks that need to review it, and they have it in their inbox. They start work on it. There is no more, one person signs after another person. All of those things are gone. Those are history. So there have been huge improvements, tremendous improvements. It's something that we've always wanted. Those are in place now with e-plans. On the residential plans, it's mainly building and planning that need to review that. Once in a while, we have fire review. So those, when the plans come in, they do go to the individual disciplines. We do coordinate our reviews with the different disciplines and get back to you.
Yeah, I think that answers it for me. I just know in another jurisdiction, basically it goes in, if it has to go to the fire marshal or health department or anything else, it stops. There's other review on it, or there was a request for there was a comment and a request for a correction. They don't even look at that or send the request out until they get it back from the other department. So I think that has caused a lot of frustration with our guys to some extent.
Yeah.
I know you guys are using electronic.
Yeah.
Another system did not allow it to move. It was directly linear. The system prohibited any movement. And I just want to make sure, or kind of assure myself that what doesn't sound like that was the case with you guys. You got a little bit more flexibility, which is
yeah. The other aspect of that is the co-location. When we were back in the office, when we get back in the office, plan review, building review, fire review, and land use, we're all together on the same floor in the same section. That communication, in my view, is really critical. Back and forth, where you're waiting for some review to be done. It really helps tremendously to have all of the primary disciplines. Engineering is also there. Our engineering techs are there. Planning folks, fire, and building folks. That communication is critical.
Yeah, one other thing that we did recently too that we noticed was kind of as you implement new software, you realize its inefficiencies and kind of just some of the things that you're beholden to because of the way that the vendor programmed the software. But was that when an application came in and it gets reviewed by all the departments, what was happening is if one department didn't need to review it at all, they would sign off as not applicable or something like that. But then what would happen is that subsequent review cycle that came in, it would get routed to all those same departments, and that possibly at times would be sitting on that individual's desk who in their minds had already said, I don't need to review this, but the system was still requiring them to take action as far as just saying, again, whether it's approved or not applicable. And we would have to go there on the 30th day of the 31-day review cycle and say, hey, guy, are you going to review this? And it would be like, I already did. I don't need to see it again. And it was like, oh, so we, unfortunately, we wasted how many weeks just thinking that, it was just on your plate waiting for review. So one of the things that we did was essentially, if you go in and say you're for the fire department and you don't need to review this building permit and you sign off as, not applicable in the first review cycle, it will not get rerouted to you again. So essentially what happens is anyone that signs off on it as approved or not applicable in whatever review cycle is when those revisions come in, it will not get routed back to them in an effort to basically increase the speed and efficiency of the review cycle and not have to just sit there and wait on somebody that didn't need to see it in the first place. So we recently made that change, but with the caveat that sometimes the changes are made that, let's say if fire doesn't need to see it and it comes in for building permit issues, and some of the building permit issues directly impact fire, it gives the building plans examiner the ability to let fire know, like, oh, I think even though you said you didn't need to see this, I think I'm going to route it to you anyways because it's impacting some of your fire code issues. So we made those changes recently, and I think that that's helped kind of lessen the unnecessary downtime, if you will. And also one other thing I wanted to touch on as Sri was talking about returning to City Hall is we found out probably Sri, about a few weeks ago, that we actually, City Hall will be continuing to telecommute through the end of 2020. So our permit center will not likely be opened at all the remainder of this year.
Okay, so we've got about half an hour if anybody wants to ask some questions. I'm just kind of going through some of the questions that we received with registrations. Here's one. I don't think it's directly related to you, but you may have heard some more information than I have. I try to keep my guys informed. Are there any new requirements for electoral inspections? I know it's L&I and some other stuff like that, but have you guys heard of anything? We've heard rumors of other jurisdictions having problem with L&I, and I have not heard any complaints from my guys. So I'm just wondering if you guys have heard anything.
A couple of things there, Ryan. On the electrical front, we do our own inspections, right? Unlike L&I, city does its own electrical inspections. Yep. There's a code change that was supposed to happen July 1st on the electrical side that got postponed due to COVID. That'll be in effect starting October. I think it's probably already on the website, on your website too. It's on city, for certain, it's on city website about the electrical code change that's happening. It's a state mandate, state requirement that we just have to implement. The other aspect with that is inspections. As you know, on the inspection side, most of our inspections are, you can request an inspection for tomorrow. It's a 24-hour turnaround for inspections, for any inspection, including your final inspections. We can get into the final inspections, have a broader discussion on that. But you could request any inspection for next day, and we'll have staff out there. We're on the residential inspections. A good number of our inspections since COVID are remote inspections. Either we're doing either FaceTime, Skype, or pictures. I've seen pictures. Our staff has seen pictures on some of those. Particularly retirement centers initially, given the scare and actually the sad, tragic situations that happened in retirement centers. We reacted to that quickly and said, we're not doing inspections. It just puts folks at risk on both sides. We were doing remote inspections. Yeah, we were doing the work. We will continue to do that through the, hopefully, as we transition out of this situation. And some things, I'm sure, we're all learning and growing as part of this, as painful as it is. Business processes are changing and will change for good. And, part of it is remote inspections. I know we've been making an effort to push a certain amount of inspections into remote inspections, especially minor inspections that are not that critical. For example, radon inspections. Those are not, for the most part, those are not life safety inspections. We just have to make sure the ducting is done properly and the fans work and vented properly. Now we say all radon inspections have to be remote. We don't do in-person inspections on those. So that improves our efficiency, your efficiency, for everyone. Trying to coordinate number of folks to be there and all of that, the troubles and issues with that. So I think long term, there will definitely be changes that'll remain with us as we come out of this. Hopefully for the better, for sure for the better.
I'm actually very heartened to hear that. I think that remote inspection is a good use of technology. What we've seen some other places using it, and I know there's a company locally that has created a good app for that, not within your realm, that was designed for commercial and actually for the private sector. But I've seen their app and their functionality, and it would be amazing for one of our jurisdictions to take it up and run with it. Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. I think with our county, or even Vancouver itself, right? I mean, there's pretty long distances if you have to bounce between places for inspections that you could do remotely. I think it might make it easier for your guys too. So I'm glad to hear that. Jack, it looks like you have another question.
Sure. Well, one thing that triggered, is it October or November that the new code goes into effect?
The electrical code is in October. Building code is in February of next year. Building code got postponed initially, and you're right, the building code got postponed. The state codes, building, energy code, residential, commercial, mechanical, plumbing, all of those codes, the rest of the non-electrical codes, fire code, those were supposed to go into effect initially July, got postponed to November, and again got postponed to February of 2021. But on the electrical side, a different cycle, different timeline, and that is October.
Okay, so because I know on the new electrical code, I think it's $1,200 more in parts on the new code for a standard house. So my concern is I'm trying to get some permits through before it kicks over that. So that would have to be, they would have to be applied for by September to avoid the new code in October.
Yes, anything that's permitted prior to that date will be grandfathered in under the current codes. And also, something that came to mind, I'm sure your folks and you're seeing this too, there's been a number of supply chain disruptions with the COVID. Part of that is GFI breakers. We're hearing that they're not in stock. I mean, I'm sure you've been to stores and your colleagues have been to stores and find out there's nothing. I've experienced it from a different point of view. You're going to store, there's nothing, and they can't even predict when the supplies will be back online. We're doing the best we can. Of course, projects have to move on, trying to tag those so we can come back and confirm that when the product does come back. For example, the breakers. The GFI breakers, apparently there's only one supplier that's backlogged for months. And we're accepting the non-GFI breaker on an interim basis that with a requirement that they go back and change it out when the supplies are back. And we're leaving the permits open.
Cherie, does the city have the option of pushing the adoption of the electrical code back to the building code in February?
No, we have to follow suit with what LNI does. All of the 13, there are 13 cities that do their own electrical inspections. We are one of them. We have to follow the standards set by the state and LNI, other than the inspection timing and the fees. That's our own schedules.
My other question was, I heard that we're going to get a system update to the electronic permitting system that allows the file naming standards, some of the things that create real issues for us when we're trying to fix minor issues.
Yeah.
Is that coming through still? Or
it is. And so as you can imagine, we were just about to test those changes with our software vendor Evolve, who their product is called Project Docs. We call it ePlans. But then COVID hit, and so it kind of just delayed everything. We're looking at probably early 2021 before we implement those changes. It's just challenging right now to try to do that stuff when not so much to get it implemented, but to test it on our end before we go live with it. It requires a lot of behind the scenes work between our permit specialists and then also our IT department, just to, because there are sometimes as you know, we have our electronic plan review system, but we also have our permitting system. And so we have to sync the two. And sometimes when you make changes on electronic plan review, the coding has to coordinate with its our counterpart, the Infor permit system. So yeah, at this point, we've kind of been told with everything else that IT is dealing with right now, just because of COVID impacts, that we're going to push that likely to early 2021. But we're testing it now, and there's some good positive changes. Absolutely, file naming is one of those. Different things related to version histories. There's a lot. It's constantly upgrading, as you can imagine with software.
Now, does the city track staff time for permits? Is there a metrics that we have to look at to say, when we were paper, we knew it took X amount of staff hours? When we're
Yeah, that I don't know. We definitely track our time, our cost recovery time, as far as time spent on permits. So if we need to bill other departments or bill against, ourselves, how we do that. But yeah, I don't honestly know as far as, time spent on paper versus time spent on e-plans. I would have to say that it's definitely less in e-plans, although from your perspective, I might not feel that way. I think if you were to see our office 3 years ago versus where we are today, we don't have, you could walk into our office and basically not see any rolls of plans. We've eliminated almost all of our filing cabinets. Again, just all positive things. The amount of public records requests that we get and how the efficiency is related to having e-plans has allowed us to speed up the public document request process instead of having to go and search for paper for hours upon hours. I mean, there's just so many upsides to this, and I just think it's only going to get better in the long run. And I know a lot of you know Lisa Erhau-Hagen. She used to be our permit specialist. We recently promoted her to, I'm trying to think of what we called her position. It's basically like a computer support specialist. She's essentially our e-plans guru. And so all of her time will be spent dealing with everything related to e-plans, efficiency for our customers, training for our customers, upgrades, basically anything related to e-plans, she's going to be point person on. And one of the things that we did before we went live with e-plans is we did an awful lot of training and outreach to our customers. Now that it's been over a year since we've been fully electronic, one of the things I've talked to Lisa about, and we were going to do before COVID, was she was going to go back out now that we've been doing it for a year and meet with those same organizations, meet with you and others, and basically, another training course, kind of a refresher course, a Q&A, just kind of helping people use the system more efficiently. So, and we hope that that's going to happen. At this point, we just don't know when. We're talking about doing webinars actually for our customers that she would lead kind of on a monthly basis. So we'll see what happens.
So Corey, did you have a question? I see you're unmuted. Maybe not. Okay, well, we've still got a bit of time if you want to ask questions, or we can always do a wrap up. Are there any other questions from anybody online?
Ryan, if you have a couple of minutes, I want to hear from folks what their frustrations have been, if they've had issues, with the permitting process or inspections or anything like that, where it didn't go well. Certainly would like to hear.
Yeah. Thanks, Sri. Yeah, that's one of the hopes I have for one of these. Like I said, in the past with other times we've had these, we've had to actually be able to come up with some solutions. So if any of you have had some individual project concerns or some concerns you run into, please speak up now so we can maybe, if they don't know about it, we can't fix it. So this is a good venue, especially you might be able to get feedback from your fellow builders as well.
Yeah, and you can certainly, if this isn't the forum that you want to do that at, you certainly can talk to Sri or I directly.
Yeah.
And you're more than welcome.
Yeah.
I'm always available too. If you need to send me something, I can speak with them, or I can do a little bit research and get back to you if you're not ready to make a statement as well. So.
Yeah, we recognize too that we're going to continue to improve our e-plan system, but we need your input as far as what's working and what's not to make those improvements. So we value your input. So I would, please do not feel at all threatened or nervous about providing input, even if it's negative. We definitely want to make it as efficient as we can for you all. That's what, you know, our job is to do, is to help you and get you through the process as quickly and painlessly as possible. So, you know, I can leave, Ryan's got my contact information and Shree's contact information. You can certainly reach out to us directly, and we're happy to talk to you. So not a problem.
Hey,
Go ahead, Aaron.
Aaron Marvin, ACT Builders. It's been a few months since our last renovation permit in the city, and I think you explained a lot of the issues that we ran into, and sounds like you've addressed them. But in the remodeling world, when it comes to interior remodeling, the concern kind of seems to continue to be that with the processes kind of geared more towards new construction, we kind of get drugged down and bogged down in the system sometimes with projects that realistically could probably be more of a kind of a rubber stamp with a field verify type process. And we run across kind of requests for items that may not be completely necessary for the actual practical application of how we're going to work in the field compared to the paper trail you guys need in the office. Is there any talks on addressing those things?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Aaron. Again, one thing that we were talking about pre-COVID was our same day review process for permits. You know, we were working on something where you could physically come to our office again when we were opened. If it was a minor type of permit application, I think is what you're speaking to, and we could review it at the counter for you and get it issued at the counter. It's a slippery slope because it's where do you draw the line on those types of, you know, what one person might consider simple, the next plans examiner might not. So we were working on establishing some parameters for what you define as kind of a same day type of permit. And again, this was all, we were in the process of doing some of this, and again, Shree can speak to this, but pre-COVID, and then everything kind of, you know, happened, and now it's not as easy just to go see somebody face to face and say, can I get this approved lickety split, because that's just hard right now.
Right.
We want to get there though.
I know that there are some other jurisdictions, you know, I use Bellevue as an example, right? We all know that King County and Bellevue have bad reputations, but Bellevue does have a very clear example on their website of what is offered as, you know, same day or, you know, no plan review permits. And I know that I've heard there's a couple of other jurisdictions. I haven't worked in them, but it would be nice to have some ability to get through some of these interior renovation permits a little bit quicker.
Yeah, great. That's great feedback. And Shree, I'm sure you've got some points to add.
Yeah, we do. We had discussions, Jason and I and our staff, we talked about, we have OTC policy, over the counter review policy. And of course, things have changed and the world, you know, where OTC is intended where folks can bring in a simple plan, get it reviewed and walk away with the permit. And that's changed dramatically. So we're looking at updating that policy. Those discussions are ongoing. And I'm glad, thank you for mentioning Bellevue. We're looking at that. We've looked at a few other examples. I think Hillsborough and Beaverton and a few other cities too. I think Beaverton has OTC process on their website. It says, you know, what kind of permits can be obtained online or can be obtained the same day. We do that for a number of permits, you know, like not so much on the commercial residential side, but on the on residential too, we do. On commercial, on roofing permits and other things, those are OTC permits. Agree, there's work to be done there. We're working on it. Thank you for bringing that up and pushing that up. We need to, yeah.
Yeah, and one other thing that we talked about too is the voting time. You know, it's when people show up at the counter, it's sometimes it can be very busy, and it's hard to just devote the time to spend a half hour with an individual at the counter, or even longer in some cases when you've got a backlog of people. So we've actually even considered looking at, you know, if we define what the parameters are for an over-the-counter type of permit or same-day permit, doing those where we're scheduling it by an appointment. So if you know that if you can check the box to say this permit falls within that, you know, same-day or over-the-counter type of of review, we're happy to set something up with you in person. That way we can devote the time. A plans examiner or maybe a planner or whoever else could sit down with you uninterrupted for a half hour, whatever it may take, and do that there, and out the door you go. But again, it's kind of hard to do right now. Not to say we can't do it, but that was one of the things we were considering doing pre-COVID.
Well, it looks like I don't have any other questions. I just wanted to say thank you. And also, Jason, and Shreya didn't mention it, the idea of having like a permit manager or someone to follow their permits, right? That you associate a permit with a person or something, whether or not they follow it. You know, I think it's a phenomenal idea. I mean, if you look, and I know it's not always the same in the private sector, but for example, software development or other industries I've worked in, you've got a champion for that for each project. And I think just to say, hey, to someone a point of contact where a permittee could go to and just not demand anything from them, but just say, hey, can you just check on where this is at for me? I mean, I think, and I've not heard this as much from you guys, about you guys, and I just know some other jurisdictions, and I think it's universal. It's not any individual jurisdiction, but the lack of having someone a point of contact, right? It's most of the issues we've been finding, which I'm sure you guys are aware of too, is communication, especially right now. If you can't get to someone, I think the frustration lies more than the actions of the review, right? So I really appreciate that that's something you guys are considering. And I'm glad to hear that might be a possibility, because I think that could go a long way to dealing with some of the communication issues. And I think most of that is just, it leads to a frustration, which will taint everything, whether it's working or not. So I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. We had a very good turnout. I really do appreciate it. I know you guys are all busy right now, especially in the middle, right of our high season. So thank you so much for joining us. I want to thank Jason and Shri again too, especially Shri. Sorry, Jason, delaying your time off or your vacation for us. I really truly do appreciate that. I think that's very kind of you, and it's really great, and you provided a lot of good information for this process. So thank you to you too. If you need their contact information, feel free to get a hold of me. I think most of you have them as well. If you have concerns, let them know, or let me know. If you want me just to research some concerns for you before you to vocalize them to them or others, I can do that as well. That's what I'm here for. Along the same lines, a lot of you work in multiple jurisdictions. We plan on having similar webinars over the next 6 to 8 weeks as we did today. This is the first. As always, scheduling is a little difficult with some of the jurisdictions. I know you guys want them on the ground working, as do they, but I think these are very, very helpful. So I'm going to try to schedule more of these in the next coming weeks. Please follow the social media page. Andrea keeps everybody updated on everything there. It's also usually included in our any email updates, the newsletter, or updates along those lines, as well as some government affairs collateral communications I make. So just keep an eye out for those. Watch for your jurisdictions. We plan on grouping West Center and Battleground into one day, and hopefully Camas and Washougal, and then we're working on getting Ridgefield as a day of itself, and possibly Clark County as well. Thank you so much, everyone. I really appreciate it, and thank you too again. I really appreciate making it work. I know there were some scheduling conflicts, and I really do appreciate it. So
Yeah, no
thanks,
worries.
everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good
Thank
day.
you.